morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
You're like,
Yes.
Where's Sarah?
She's in the
it's
back.
a beautiful morning.
Amen.
Well,
Do we have any announcements?
I have an announcement.
Okay.
Next Saturday at 9 o'clock, there's a leadership training event that Jamie and I are going to, right, Jamie? Okay. And everyone is invited. It's at First United Methodist in Sulphur Springs. It's from 9 to 12. We're going to cover the cost of that for you. Just kidding, it's free. Okay, and then we'll go eat lunch afterwards. So why don't we meet here at the church like at no later than 8:15, between 8 and 8:15. We'll be happy to drive you, and we're going to learn lots of great things. And if you don't go, then you're going to get volunteered for things. So, your choice.
Even if you don't go, you get volunteered for it.
Especially if you don't go, you'll get volunteered.
That's right. Anyone else with any announcements?
I'd like to announce that at the council meeting this past Monday night, we set March 2nd as our annual Lord's Acre celebration. That's a Saturday evening, and so if y'all would put that on your calendar and start thinking about what fabulous goodies you might make that auction off so great, and what things you might want to put in the silent auction. And those can be brought at any time between now and then and put on some of the tables.
And that's March 3rd.
March
Second.
2nd.
and one other thing about that, you might mention what the proceeds are going to go to.
Oh, yes, thank you. The proceeds are going to go to the church's budget shortfall.
Folks, this is a way to get rid of that shortfall.
And your stuff.
Just get rid of the stuff.
And speaking of shortfall, there's some questions.
And speaking of the shortfall, here she comes again. One thing you can count on, I'm persistent and I'm dogmatic. But truly, as I drove over here this morning, it's interesting, the lesson that we had, I actually made it to Sunday school. But the lesson we had was on Matthew and about wealth and giving and being forgiven. It was very interesting, but as I drove over this morning, I thought, what do I want to say this morning? And the main thing I want to say is we have such a warm, loving, welcoming membership. I drive by many churches as I come here. We have large churches in Mineola. This is the church I want to be with. This is the church family I want to worship with. Not just because my family's here, but the importance is that when I leave here on Sundays, I feel this warming love, the chance to fellowship with all of you, and it reboosts me, recharges me, that without God, without this church family, it's difficult to go through life. He gives us trials and tribulations, but we can rely on one another and God to see us through. It isn't our privilege to be here. It's our responsibility. We must look out for one another. We must make sure that we still have this holy place to come and worship Him together. And I just ask that as we all start the new year, that you still consider the fact that we're not quite there. We have $7,000 and we need 19. So I challenge you, I wish I could be financially wealthy and I could say everything that you donate, I'll match it. I know some people have done that in the past. I'm not there. But I am, what I have tried to do is that what I give to general offering, I'm trying to match with what I give to the budget shortfall. And that's the only way I know that I can do it. I can find a way. Match what you would, whatever you can do. But to remember, we've got 2 buckets. One that needs to cover the shortfall, and one that is just covering general offering. So, you know, we want to keep the lights on and a warm sanctuary and a beautiful family center operational and in good repair and maintenance. And we have Richard to thank for trying to pick up on the pieces and do things that need to be done. Everyone is giving in their own way. I just ask that you try to give just a little bit more. Thanks.
Yeah, Angela, I could say a word on that too. Our chairman of the council last time, Joe, pointed out that if we don't figure out a way to meet that shortfall otherwise, there's really only one other option. You know, we got to cut expenses. So let's kind of use this opportunity. You know, when Jenna brought this up, Lord's Acre at council, you know, it was like a light went on. You know, here is the best thing that's come, best idea that's come along for us to actually make that shortfall and not cut expenses. So let's get, like Richard says, you know, we can get rid of some stuff that we no longer need or want, but maybe somebody else's treasure, you know, and get that money. And I was moved when Marilyn was talking about the church family, you know, how it motivates us and encourages us. And I thought, when I came back to this church, you know, of course, I was in diapers in this church when I was first brought here, you know. I was drug here, you know, that's my drug problem. And, but when Peggy and I came back, you know, it was different everything. And Miss Frankie was, I was in her Sunday school class until the Paras and Sparrows asked me to lead their group. But Miss Frankie had this way back, you know, this is more than 20 years ago. Frankie said something that I'll never forget. And, you know, she said, I come to this church for reinforcements. That was her word, reinforcement. And that's what Marilyn was talking about. It reinforces us just to be with this group, you know. My church family. You reinforce me. Reinforce everybody. And
Joanne, I've been here a long time.
you have. Anything else to say?
Praise God.
But you were a real inspiration to me at that time. And, you know, I just believe God has given us this opportunity to take care of that shortfall with the Lord's Acre.
Are there any other announcements? Then, let's go to the opening hymn, which is on page 64, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, verses 1, 2, and 4. Verses 1. just left this morning.
Mother's gonna celebrate her graduation from the Plano Heart Health Hospital Friday when we go. 5 years since she got her new valve, so.
Great Fisher.
Yes.
My family, my brothers, Roger and Bobby Coe.
I want to thank the church family for their thoughts and prayers for my older sister Marcia, who has gone through total hip replacement in California, and she's doing very well. And she said yesterday, as she sent a video of her walking behind her walker, she said, "Yay, it's finally good to walk again." So
Great.
thank you. She's making progress, and I know that the prayers have helped.
And my friend Diane that we prayed for, she asked me this morning, had I told the church of her miracle? And I said I had, but I will again. She is the doctor said she's cancer free.
Wow.
Praise God for that. She's still recovering. She still has a little bit of time left to get everything sorted out. She's gonna be all right.
3 grandbabies are sick, so.
Oh, my heavens.
Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Yes, what?
I just read to Miss Claire Ziegler this week, and she took her last chemo this past Monday, and she's considered cancer.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this day, for the ability to gather here together, and for the warmth and the comfort and the family that this congregation gives to one another, that we can go forward knowing that we are loved, that we are cared for. And Lord God, we pray for those who need prayer, for Sadie's family, for Galia, Lord, that she may be returned to health, for Mom, that give her strength, God, to continue on through this disease that she has. We pray for the Grady Fisher family, Lord, at the loss of Grady, Lord. May they be comforted. For Marcia, for grandchildren that are sick, for chemo treatments that are ended and that cancer is defeated, Lord, that evil thing. And Lord God, we just thank you again for the ability to be here. May you surround us with your Spirit, God. May you enwrap us in your grace. In Jesus' precious and holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Angela, I thank God every day that I feel as good as I do,
Amen.
as old as I am.
We forgot Charles.
Charles and Sherry, please. Now, Lord, please be with Charles and Sherry also, Lord, that this evil cancer thing may be gone. Amen. All right, offering.
That got our attention.
Dear God, please bless the offering that we're about to take, that it may be used for your glory, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
mixology, we did that.
Young people, we're not gonna do that today.
Yep. Neil, 467. Trust and obey.
This congregation, that is so loud. Please do it again. Instead of reading the entire psalm, because we're going to be covering it in the sermon, if you rise, I'll read you just the first 3 verses of Psalm 39. I said, I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So I remained utterly silent, not even saying anything good. But my anguish increased and my heart grew hot from within. While I meditated, the fire burned, and then I spoke with my tongue. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated. So I was given 3 pieces of advice before I started. And I'm going to share those with you before we actually do the sermon. You'll be happy to know that these were the pieces of advice I got. First, I was told that no one likes a sermon that is over 10 minutes. 9 minutes would be better. Second, I was told that there are not only 1 but 2 important football games today. And third, a loving member of my family told me, don't get caught up in the details and get us out by noon. So those are the guidelines that I'm going by. If you would bow your head, let's say a prayer. Dear Lord, help me to put a muzzle on my mouth when needed and to open my mouth with your words and a positive lesson for this morning. We ask this in thy name. Amen.
Amen.
Drunks, murderers, thieves, and fornicators. For goodness sake, do not raise your hands.
You're talking about lawyers.
What I'm going to talk about today are Old Testament heroes. But do you know what all these Old Testament heroes had in common?
Outspoken.
Outspoken, that's right. Every one of them had problems. Why? Because just like us, they have a condition. You might call it a medical condition. You could call it a condition of the soul. They were human, and they were sinners just like us. Not only did King David struggle with adultery, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, even if his life depended on it. I happen to know someone like that. It's not fun. Okay, so he struggled just like we do. He loved God, but he still made mistakes, big mistakes. He worried about whether he'd wasted his life. Have you ever had those same worries? Have you ever worried that you're doing anything constructive, anything to help others? He had good intentions, and I'm sure he didn't wake up every day saying, man, today I'm going to waste my life. He probably started the day on a positive note. This morning, I'm going to invite you to read what I'm going to call King David's diary. Because in fact, the words of Psalm 39 are his journal entries, or his diary entries, about his struggles. So let me ask you this. Is there a person in this room who has never had a struggle? I've got to tell you, if you don't think you've ever had a problem, then you are the problem. So you might ask yourself, have you wasted your life? Have I done anything in life that matters? Have I been bad enough that God is punishing me? And through David's words in Psalm 39, we're going to see that he came to a simple conclusion. Because life is short, because life is fleeting, we must live it for the Lord. And life isn't just short. It goes by like the blink of an eye. The book of James describes life as a vapor. The Psalms compare life to grass growing in a field, all flourishing and beautiful in the morning, and basically dead by sundown. Do you ever feel like that? Dead by sundown? You're lying, because I've talked to half of it, and you do. David tells us not only once, but 2 times in this psalm, in both verse 5 and 11, that every man at his very best is a mere breath. The word breath is a Hebrew word that appears 36 times in Ecclesiastes, and I want you to think of it as vanity. It refers to something that has absolutely no substance. It's transient, brief, unstable, short-term. It's over in a flash. Have you ever looked up into the night sky and felt like you were just a speck in the universe? Have you compared yourself to the greatness of our eternal God? Our God who spoke that very universe into existence. Think about this. The most distant object that you can see with your naked eye is the Andromeda Galaxy. But do you realize that you would have to travel at the speed of light for 2.2 million years to get there? I want you to think about that while we look at David's words from verse 4. Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. So let me ask you this. What can you take with you when you die?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. We work hard. We train our brains. Some of you train your bodies, not me. But when we die, our bodies are just going to go into a box in the ground, or be cremated, or go into a deep freezer somewhere with Walt Disney. David knew this when he wrote verse 6. Surely, everyone goes around like a mere phantom. In vain they rush about, heaping up wealth, without knowing those whose it will finally be. Now, in some congregations elsewhere, I would talk about being young, and I would tell you not to count on being young forever, but we're at Tinney Chapel. So folks, for the most part, we're not young. So, as a mature audience, I want to share a story with you, an old legend from the Middle East. There once was a merchant in Baghdad who asked his servant to run an errand. While at the marketplace, the servant rounded a corner and came face to face with Lady Death. He was so frightened that he ran home to tell his master. I'm terrified, he said. I want to take the fastest horse and ride towards Samaria. The master knew he was afraid and granted his request. Later that very day, the same merchant went himself to the marketplace, and he too rounded a corner and saw Lady Death. He confronted her and said, "Why did you startle my servant?" Lady Death replied, "Frankly, it was I who was startled. I couldn't understand why your servant was in Baghdad, because I have an appointment with him tonight in Samaria." None of us can escape that appointment. So since we can't outrun death, we have basically two choices. First, you could live for yourself. You can have the philosophy of eat, drink, be merry, tomorrow we die. And that would be fun for a short time. Or you could make the decision to live for the Lord, which is the only option that really has any hope. To live for the Lord means that I'm going to put all of my hope in the Lord. Look at verse 7. "But now, Lord, what do I look for? For my hope is in you." So where do you put your hope? Relationships with family and friends and people from church? That's great, and loving relationships are a wonderful gift from God. But people, the reality is, people can easily be taken away. If your hopes are there, you could be left empty and disappointed. Is your hope in the world or in the things of the world? Again, you're surely going to be disappointed, because those things cannot and will not satisfy your soul, and they again are as fleeting as your breath on a cold morning, a morning just like today. But if you make the Lord and His promises your hope, you will never, ever be disappointed. So, Tinney Chapel, do you believe that? Do we as a congregation believe that? Do we believe that the Lord will not disappoint us? It's easy to say, and it's even easier to agree with. But in reality, even Christians can get caught up in the things of the world rather than the things of God. We say we have hope in the Lord, but how do we spend our time? How do we spend our talents and our money? Do we pursue financial security in front of the pursuit of God? Do we work so many hours trying to provide a great first world life for our kids that we don't have time to share the gospel, to feed a hungry person, or give someone a coat on a cold day? Are we too busy pursuing the pleasures of the world? Sometimes I understand something. If these issues are hitting too close to home for you, I'm bringing them up because these are the same issues that I struggle with. Can you imagine what we could accomplish if we spent even half the time that we spent on Netflix and Facebook and crosswords and video games and gave that time to the Lord? Maybe this is hitting too close to home, so let's move on to another verse. To live for the Lord means that I will make holiness my desire. Verse 8, "Save me from my transgressions, and do not make me the scorn of fools." No one gets pounced on harder than a Christian who makes a mistake. David prays that he won't give anyone a reason to doubt the Lord because of David's choices. Specifically in verses 1 through 3, he asks for holiness in his speech. "I said I will watch my ways and keep my tongue from sin. I will put a muzzle on my mouth while in the presence of the wicked. So I remained utterly silent, not even saying anything good. But my anguish increased and my heart grew hot within me. While I meditated, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue." I chose to speak on this very passage today because of the words of verse 1. "Lord, I put a muzzle on my mouth." David was aware that his complaints might be misunderstood or misinterpreted in the wrong company. He wanted to be oh so very careful not to say anything that would make God look bad. So he muzzled his mouth. To grow in holiness, you must learn and I must learn to muzzle our mouths. Amen. That was a little quick, Ronnie. James talks about what comes out of our mouths a lot. The tongue is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With that poison tongue, we can damage people, we can damage relationships, we can destroy families, and churches can even become destroyed. We should be using our words to glorify God and to build up our people and to build up each other, not tear each other down. We all know that our mouths can sin, but there's more than even that. Mark 7 addresses the sins of our mind. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All of these evil deeds come from the inside, and they defile a person. But thankfully, Jesus gave us a positive point of view of these things in Matthew 5:6 from the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Think about that, hunger and thirsting, that desire for something. Hunger and thirst are really strong motivators. When you hunger and you thirst, you recognize that you have a need. Sadly, even God's people don't always sense their intense need for holiness, so they just dabble with it. They spend some time on Sundays and maybe a little bit of time on Wednesdays, but it's not the focus of their life. They don't hunger and thirst after it. So are you being honest with yourself right now? Are we as a congregation being honest with ourselves? Are we dabbling or are we dedicated? And if you're thinking that I'm describing you, then listen to this. Are you thinking, hey man, I don't really hunger and thirst after righteousness. If God wanted to lay it on me, I suppose that'd be great, but I'm not striving after it as if my very survival depended on it. If that describes you, how do you develop that hunger and thirst for righteousness? One way that God does it, and we see this in Psalm 39, is through the idea of trials. And this is what happened to David. David was having some type of problem in his life. We don't know the details and they don't matter. Maybe he was sick, but he began to believe that God was punishing him for something. What matters is that, like us, David was struggling. To live for the Lord means that I submit to his hand of discipline in my life. That's a hard concept, God's hand of discipline. God often uses trials to show us our lack of holiness. Trials should cause us to examine ourselves and to see what God might actually be trying to teach us. David realized that God was disciplining him, and he explains this general principle in verse 11. When you rebuke and discipline anyone for their sin, you consume what is precious to him like a moth. Surely everyone is but a breath. Why would God consume like a moth everything that is precious to us? That sounds kind of cruel. But the answer is that we are counting the wrong things as precious. Our focus is not where it needs to be. Our hope is not fully on the Lord, but in other things. So God has to consume those other things to show us that He alone is worth hoping in. David's final plea is full of mixed emotions. He pleads with God to remove the trial before he perishes in verse 10. Yet, then again in 11, he acknowledges God's right to correct him, thus showing his submission to God. Now look at 12 and 13. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cry for help. Do not be deaf to my weeping. I dwell with you as a foreigner, a stranger, as all my ancestors were. Look away from me, that I may enjoy life again before I depart and am no more. This final appeal contains a plea that God would hear his prayer, his cry, even his very tears. Then he asked God to turn away his gaze so that David could have a brief rest from his trials before he dies. He was desperate. Thankfully, our God is understanding of how we speak when we are desperate. He grants the requests of our hearts, not necessarily the words that come out of our mouths. The key to growing through his discipline is to submit to God and to ask him to help you to learn the lessons that he has for you in these trials that he sends our way. Let the words of Hebrews 12 guide you. In this all-out match against sin, others have suffered far worse than you have. To say nothing of what Jesus went through, all that bloodshed. So don't feel sorry for yourselves, or have you forgotten how good parents treat their children, or that God regards you as his children? My dear child, Don't shrug off God's discipline, but don't be crushed by it either. It's the child that he loves that he disciplines, the child he embraces that he corrects. God is educating you. God is educating us, Tinney Chapel. That's why you must never drop out. He's treating you as dear children. This trouble you're in isn't a punishment, it's training. It's the normal experience of children. Only irresponsible parents leave children to fend for themselves. Would you prefer an irresponsible God? We respect our own parents for training us and for not spoiling us. So why not embrace God's training so we can truly live? While we were children, our parents did what seemed best to them. But God is doing what is actually best. He's training us to live God's holy best. At the time, discipline isn't really much fun. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off handsomely, for it's the well-trained who find themselves mature in their relationship with God. So my prayer for you today, Tinney Chapel, is that you can find yourself in a mature relationship with God. For it might be this very afternoon that you go to Brookshire's, you round the corner, and you see Lady Death up close. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Sarah, you can speak to me like that any day you want.
Don't go to work.
My faith looks up to thee, page 452. We're gonna get out of here way before 12.
May the blessings from God be upon us, and may we go forward to be the people of God.
Amen.